The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, but early in the morning he arrived again in the temple area, and all the people started coming to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and made her stand in the middle. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they could have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and began to write on the ground with his finger. But when they continued asking him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he bent down and wrote on the ground. And in response they went away one by one, beginning with the elders. So he was left alone with the woman before him. Then Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She replied, "No one, sir." Then Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore." The Gospel of the Lord. When I was in the 5th grade, my school put on the production of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. I was the star, Joseph. The one thing that I do remember was that there was one of the fathers with one of those big camcorders that was filming the entire show. And I had this tremendous fear that one day I will go on YouTube and I will find it. But I was introduced during that play to the story of Joseph, the Old Testament Joseph, the story in Genesis. I felt it was most appropriate this evening on the vigil of Saint Joseph to speak a little bit about the Old Testament Joseph. Because I believe the story of Joseph gives us a great understanding of who we are as Christians and as a church, and can give us a wonderful reflection in this time of Lent. We meet Joseph as Jacob's favorite son, and he is the envy of his brothers. The relationship with Joseph and his brothers could only be described as sibling rivalry. Great bitterness, fighting, arguing. Joseph doesn't handle the favoritism all too well. He's rather arrogant, a bit of a showboater. His father gives him this coat, this Technicolor coat, and he made sure that everyone, especially his brothers, knew what he got, who he got it from, and why he received the gift. It's another reason why I love this story, because it kind of describes growing up with my older brother. One day I had a conversation with my parents. I said, "Who is your favorite?" I'm the baby and I'm the priest. I thought I was a shoo-in. My mother said, we love you all the same, but sometimes I like your brother a little bit more. Growing up with my older brother, there was this sibling rivalry. There was this bitterness. We always seemed to fight, always seemed to argue. Not because of him, but because of me. I convinced myself that that's what brothers do. They fight, they argue. Then I met someone in high school who had an older brother, and they were the best of friends. They had a good, healthy, and happy relationship. And I realized that my theory that all brothers fight was just an excuse to not work on my relationship with him. Do I dare say that we all have that person or persons in our lives? Someone who has hurt us, who has betrayed us, who has angered us. And if we're honest, there are those that we have hurt, who we have betrayed, who we have angered. And we try to give the excuse. We tell people, you don't understand. Or one of my favorites, we have to love them, but we don't have to like them. But it seems to me that it's all an excuse not to work on those relationships. That is the great challenge in this evening's reflection. For us to work on those relationships. For us to let go of the anger and the heartache and the disappointment. The brothers are furious at Joseph. They have good reason. Joseph is rather arrogant. And there really is no reason whatsoever for Joseph to be the favorite. It's not like he was the firstborn son that we so often see in the Old Testament as the father's favorite. And so there may be very good reason to be angry and hurt at someone. Or at the very least, if we're holding this anger, we should have a good reason why. I have distant cousins, siblings with each other, who have not spoken with each other for over 30 years. They can't even be in the same room with each other. There was a mediator at my ordination that one would come to the ordination and the other would come to the first Mass so that they would not be in the same room together. When you ask them what are they fighting about, they can't tell you. They have no recollection whatsoever. They don't remember. But yet, they're still fighting. How about this one? Tell you how dysfunctional my family is. I have an aunt who was so angry at her sister-in-law because at her father's wake, the sister-in-law sat in the front chair of the wake service. So angry, so bitter over a chair. Or perhaps we have what I call the Walter Klimek syndrome. I named it after my own experience. Walter Klimek failed me in biology in sophomore year. Now I know I'm a teacher, so I know that it's the student that fails. No, I tell you, he was a terrible teacher. And he ruined my summer after my sophomore year. But he may have been an awful teacher, but I was an awful student as well. We can often play the victim. We're angry at the wrong person. I see that all of the time with my students. They get in trouble. They do something wrong. They get corrected. They get yelled at. They get a detention. And then they get mad at me. They roll their eyes. Oh, I hate the rolling of the eyes. My point is that if we're holding on to this anger, if we have this bitterness, this hurt, then we better know who we're angry at. We better know why we are angry. We better have a good reason why we're holding on to that anger. The truth is that sometimes it is for a good reason. We may all have that enemy, but there is no doubt that we've all been hurt and betrayed. We've all been disappointed by others. Someone has said, done something to us that has left us angry. If you've ever felt hurt or betrayed or disappointed, raise your hand. As my mother says, we all got something. The question isn't whether or not it's a good reason or not a good reason. The question is, what do we do with this anger? What do we do with the bitterness and the frustration and the disappointment? Joseph's brothers, at first, they desired to kill him. And then they realized that they could get a little bit of money, and so they sold Joseph to be a slave. Either which way, they just want to remove Joseph from their lives, refusing to work on that relationship. And so what do we do? What do we do, and how do we handle those moments when we feel hurt and betrayed and disappointment? Well, sometimes we pout, making sure that everybody knows how angry we are. Have you ever met someone, when they walk in the room, you say, boy, that somebody did something to that person? I usually ask, what did I do to that person? You say, what's wrong? And they respond, nothing. Are you okay? I'm fine. I've learned in my 17 years as a priest that if somebody answers the question, nothing is wrong and everything is fine, it usually means everything is wrong and nothing is fine. I lived with an older priest who really was a very saintly man, except when he was sick. When he was sick, it was completely the opposite. Because if you knocked on his door to check in, he'd get angry at you for disturbing him. And then if you didn't knock on the door to check in, he'd get angry with you because you didn't care. Almost as if he just enjoyed staying in the anger. Sometimes that's true for us. Sometimes we just enjoy staying in the anger. After all, it's a lot easier to be angry at someone than to forgive them. It's a lot easier to hold on to that anger than to let it go. Sometimes we deal with the anger with the silent treatment. Oh, the silent treatment. How many fights in my life could have been avoided if I just took advantage of telling my side of the story, or if I just stopped and listened to their side of the story? I know of one story where, when it comes to death, it really sees the best, and sometimes it really sees the worst in people. There was a person that was a mother who was very angry at her nephew because she saw her nephew wearing a watch that her father promised to give to her son. And so he, passive aggressive, anger, enraged, that as she accused the nephew of stealing the watch. Well, her anger was seen, and finally her son said, "Well, what's wrong, Mom? Why are you so angry at your nephew?" Mother told, and the son said, "No, Ma, I thought that watch was ugly. I gave it to him." The anger, the rage, the disappointment could have all been avoided if they just took the time to have a conversation. And then the other way in which we deal with our anger and our hurt is through gossip. The great disease of our church. How many lost souls have there been through the words, "Did you hear?" And so we gossip. We spread rumors. We tell lies. We seek revenge. We desire not evil on the other person, but sometimes we desire bad things to happen to that person. A friend of mine jokes around, but I don't know how much of a joke it is. He says, "When I die, you're in charge of erasing my Facebook page and my chats," because he knows that he uses the chats on the phone and the Facebook page to express his anger at people. How much courage we are able to have when we're not seen. But it's also now becoming the vehicle of tremendous gossip and hurt. All because of what we're holding on to. And so what do? Right? Because ultimately the relationship and the story of Joseph and his brothers is really an invitation for us to let go of that anger, to let go of that resentment, to let go of the hurt. The story of Joseph and his brothers is the invitation for us to work on those relationships. Yes, even the relationship of the person we are thinking about right now. Because here's the truth. And this is not spirituality, this is practicality. The truth is there are times and nights where we're tossing and turning, thinking about this person, thinking about this situation. Well, that person is sound asleep. It's time, my friends, to let go. How do we do that? May I suggest for us 4 ways. 4 ways in which we are able to work on these relationships and to let go of that anger and that resentment and that hurt. The very first way is to look at the positive. Not in a silly or fake optimistic way, but to see the good. To see the rose in the midst of the thorns. To see the resurrection after the cross. You know the story of Joseph. He's sold to be a slave, and he is found to be this great interpreter of dreams. And he interprets Pharaoh's dream that Egypt would suffer, the world would suffer a great famine. And so because of this interpretation, Egypt was able to prepare themselves, ultimately surviving the famine. So much food that they were able to give to others. You see, from Joseph, he was able to save Egypt. From Joseph, he was able to save his brothers. All from that moment, that tragedy, that betrayal, that hurt, God was able to do something beautiful and something great. So even in those moments of the crosses that have been given to us, there is a resurrection. There is a beauty. There is a rose in the midst of those thorns. You know, a friend of mine hates when I talk about the Walter Klimek failing me in biology story. Because it was that summer, I will say, it was the worst summer of my life that I got stuck in a classroom. But the very first day of summer school, I sat to the only person that I recognized. He failed with me in my class. I did not know him. I never had a conversation with him. I sat next to him because he was a familiar face. That day we talked, and every day in that summer we spoke. We became friends, such good friends that I witnessed his wedding. I baptized his children. He attended my first Mass and my ordination and my installations as pastor and rector. From that moment of hurt came something beautiful. And here I am saying how terrible of a summer it was, when in reality, something beautiful and something good came from it. I think that's what forgiveness ultimately is all about. It's to be able to see the good that has come from the difficulties and the trials that others have caused us. Forgiveness is not approving their action. It's certainly not allowing that hurt to happen again and again. You have been given a cross. Forgiveness comes when we are able to see the beauty from that cross. It's why our Lord was able to say, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Because he knew that the cross would lead to salvation, that the cross would bring light and life and forgiveness for the world. So in the midst of our hurt, and the midst of the pain and the difficulties, in the midst of the anger, can we see the fruit? Can we see the resurrection from that cross? When we are able to see the positive, we're able to let go. The second is to be grateful. To be thankful for what we have. To be thankful for who we have. You know, it's human nature, I think, to constantly focus on the negative. Anytime we're given an evaluation, they could speak highly of us. 99 things that they could say how great we are. But what do we focus on? What do we think about? That one negative comment. It's part of our human nature. We could do that in our relationships as well. Here we so much focus on the pain and the hurt and the anger that we forget to be thankful for those who care, those who traveled and journeyed with us as we picked up that cross, those who have forgiven us, those who do love us. How beautiful it is that we have this mission during the celebration of Mass, the Eucharist, which means thanksgiving, because it gives us that opportunity for us to focus on the good, the blessings, the graces, and the gifts that God has bestowed upon us. And I think you would agree with me. No matter how life has been for us, there is reason for us to be thankful, because God has given us many blessings and graces and gifts. The third way is to celebrate. The Christian life is a life of joy. We are not Puritans. We as Christians are allowed to have fun, to laugh, to enjoy life. Now, we're not secularist either, right, where that's all our life is based upon. But we know that our joy comes from the Lord. Because when you have the Lord, you truly have it all. There is no room for resentment and anger and jealousy in the Christian life, because it leads to misery. And there is nothing more miserable than a miserable Christian. This life as Christians is a life filled with joy. And it is time for us to express and to live that joy in being a follower of Christ. The fourth one, the last one, and this is the tough one. This is the really tough one. To let go, we have to seek forgiveness. To seek forgiveness towards those that we have hurt. Because the more that we seek forgiveness, quite honestly, the easier it will be for us to forgive. Because when we recognize our faults and our failures, we resist the temptation of judging and condemning. Just as Jesus challenges in today's gospel, let the one without sin cast the first stone. You know, this past birthday of mine, one of my dear friends forgot it. I didn't get a text. I didn't get a card. I didn't get a gift. Nothing. I went to bed on my birthday disappointed and angry. And then I realized something. I must have missed my friend's birthday about a half a dozen times. I needed to ask for his forgiveness before I was able to forgive him. The truth is, those that have done towards us, if we're really honest, in some way we probably have done that towards others. We are invited to go and to ask for that forgiveness. To say those words that perhaps are the most difficult words to say. I'm sorry. And whether or not they forgive us, that's on them. But the more that we seek that forgiveness, the easier it is for us to forgive. But also to seek forgiveness for those who have hurt us as well. Now, I said it correctly. To seek forgiveness from those who have hurt us. I know the argument is going to be, what are you talking about, Father? They should apologize to me. I get it. And maybe they should. But what I do know is that we have allowed the anger. We have allowed the jealousy. We have allowed the hatred to stir in our hearts. And that's what needs to be forgiven. We've allowed them to control us. And we need to seek their forgiveness. At the end, Joseph's brothers come and they seek the help of Joseph. Once they realize that their ways have changed and that their brother was alive, they fell on their knees, an act of forgiveness, an act of seeking, an act of apologizing, an act of humility. And Joseph's welcomed them home, that he has forgiven them. But it was also an act for him, seeking his brother's forgiveness for the wrong that he had done. A friend of mine who went to the seminary was an older vocation. He was in business with his brother for many, many years. In that business, his brother stole from him. His brother cheated him. His brother lied to him. There was great resentment, great anger, rightfully so. Well, he has a conversion experience, and he turns back to the Lord when all of the pain and all of the hurt was happening. And from there, he felt this call to the priesthood. And he applied to the priesthood, and he went to an interview, and each time he was denied. Finally, after the third or fourth time, he asked why he was not getting accepted. The director said, "You have too much anger in your heart. You need to go and seek your brother's forgiveness." He did, got ordained, and is a very holy and wonderful pastor in the Diocese of Brooklyn. That's not easy to do, to seek forgiveness. But we have to work. And I think that's the point of today's mission talk. That as we look at our relationships with one another, to not give up on those relationships, to not stop working on those relationships, but rather to work on letting go and letting God. What a beautiful saying that is. Let go and let God. Let go of the anger, the resentment, the hurt. Work on these relationships and allow God to work with us and through us. Amen.